Cells and Microscopes. In this video, scientists will be able to identify cells by analyzing microscope images. So when you're looking for cells, a lot of it has to do with just experience, but there are a few tricks to identifying cells while you're looking under a microscope. The first is to look for simple or repeating shapes. You'll notice in the image on the right that the cells there have fairly simple shapes, just simple ovals. Shapes like circles, ovals, sometimes squares and rectangles, those are common cell shapes. Anything that's more complex than that normally aren't cells. The next thing you might want to look for is a clear container with dark parts inside. When we learn about the parts of the cell, you'll start to know what those names are. But for now, when you're looking under a microscope, simply look for the parts that are darker than the clear inside. Speaking of which, the third thing is that under a microscope, most cells are transparent. That means that you can see through them. If anything is completely opaque or doesn't allow light to go through it, it tends to not be a cell. Finally, when you look at cells under a microscope, they tend to have a border that goes around them. Again, looking at the shapes on the right, you'll notice that each cell has a slightly darker border around the edge of it than on the inside. So let's take a look at some examples. Here's some plant cells. Notice it checks a bunch of the boxes. I'm seeing simple repeated shapes. They look like clear containers with dark parts inside, and they have very clear purple borders. Now you might be wondering, what kind of plant is purple? Well, it is important to know that scientists can stain cells whatever color they want. So a green plant could be stained blue or orange or red, or in this case purple. So don't use color as a clue. And here's some more plant cells. Again, notice the repeating shapes, the clear borders, and the dark bits inside. Here's an example where scientists stained the cells red. Again, the repeated shapes with the dark parts inside. Here's an example of animal cells. Now, animals tend to be a little bit more squishy than plants, and so their shapes tend to not be as organized and rectangular. Here's some other animal cells. Notice just because the shapes aren't repeating, several of the other clues are still there. I'm seeing the dark borders, the clear insides, and the dark bits inside those cells. This is actually human skin cells. Now let's move on to some things that look like cells but really aren't. In this image, you're looking at microscopic bits of plastic. Notice that they check some of the boxes. A few of those pieces of plastic are clear. However, the pieces that are clear that you can see through don't have the dark stuff inside like cells do. Here again is something that kind of looks like a cell. It looks transparent, you can see through it, but I'm noticing that it doesn't have the dark border, and there's none of those organelles or little bits inside of it like cells have. In fact, this is just string under a microscope. Finally, here's some dirt. It might have some repeating shapes, but notice how the light cannot go through it, and that's a pretty telltale sign that you're not looking at cells.